The story begins with a narrative explaining the importance of divers, who play a vital role in maintaining the internet connectivity across the entire world. Afterward, the scene shifts to a diver, drowning and gasping for life, and afterward, the scene cuts here. Now, we see Chris with his soon-to-be wife, and gleefully informs her about his new mission at the Clipper Quay. However, Morag, Chris's wife, becomes a bit sad, as she doesn't want him to go to do this dangerous job. Nonetheless, Chris convinces her, saying, "I will be fine and return soon." Afterward, Chris arrives at the Clipper Quay, where his ship is waiting for him. On the ship, he meets his longtime best friend and colleague, Duncan, and later meets other colleagues. Craig welcomes all the crew members and explains to them that they have to replace a section of pipelines on the seabed, and they are going to live in tin cans for the next 28 days for this mission. After this, Craig asks all the divers to go and get themselves ready. Here, Chris tries to befriend Dave, a veteran diver, but Dave gives him the cold shoulder, compelling Chris to leave. Afterward, everyone starts entering the Bell, a protective cabin in the ship. Duncan, Dave, and Chris share the same cabin. Duncan reveals to Chris that Dave may seem to be unfriendly, but as a matter of fact, he is a good man by nature. Afterward, all the teams report to Craig and let him know they are good to go. So, Craig turns on the gas supply and informs all the teams that in a while, they will reach 300 feet below sea level, where it will be pitch black and freezing cold. Duncan, Chris and Dave spend time with one another. Then, Duncan drops a bombshell on Chris and Dave, saying he is being forced by the company to quit this job, and this is his last rotation. "I don't know why the company is willing to sack me after serving 20 years. I think I can serve 10 more years." The ship continues to sail into the teeth of the howling winds. And shortly afterward, it comes over the dive site. Craig wakes up the team, consisting of Duncan, Chris and Dave, and asks them to get ready to get the job done. Dave and Chris put on their mission-specific gear, while Duncan guides them. Dave asks Chris to follow his lead down there, and subsequently, they start going into the waters to fix the pipelines. Dave puts on the protective helmet and dives into the waters. And shortly afterward, Chris follows his suit. Shortly after, he lands on the seabed. He looks around and finds nothing but darkness. Chris asks Duncan for the coordinates, just then Dave arrives to lead him. A power cable is dropped onto the seafloor to replace the damaged one. Dave connects it to the manifold, restoring the power in the manifold. Afterward, Chris enters the manifold to fix the pipeline. Just then, all the thrusters of the ship go offline, creating panic on the ship. Dave warns Chris to come out of the pipelines, as the ship starts moving. So, Chris begins escaping the pipelines. Up there, the ship's anchor loses its hold on the seabed, causing the vessel to drift unintentionally. This creates a panicking situation on the ship. Hence, Duncan begins getting the divers as much umbilical as possible. Dave informs Chris that their umbilicals are over the manifold and they have to use them to climb to the top. He asks Chris to make it snappy, or they will die by drowning in the sea. Both the divers start making it to the ship. Dave gets to the top of the manifold, but doesn't find the ship over his head. Shortly after, Chris tries to make it to the manifold, but his umbilical is stuck in the pipes and despite his efforts, he can't free it. Down there, the power cable also comes off, causing the manifold to shut down again. Dave asks Duncan to give him more slack so he can pull up Chris. But Duncan responds that there is no more slack in the bell. Meanwhile, the umbilical starts snapping, and Chris is forced onto bailout gas, leaving him with only 10 minutes of oxygen to survive. Dave warns Chris, "Your umbilical is about to snap and you will get pulled off the structure. I will come back for you, but I can't rescue you if you don't make it back to the top of the manifold." At that precise moment, the umbilical breaks off, dragging Chris down to the seafloor. Up there, the ship is also caught in the storm. Dave manages to reach the manifold, and briefs Duncan that Chris's umbilical snapped while he was coming up, and he is gone. Craig suggests to the captain, "We should drop anchor to stop the ship from drifting further." Then, the captain replies that there are acres of oil pipelines down there, and the anchor could snag any one of them and rupture it. Then, Craig argues, there are far more seabed than there is pipeline, and if we don't drop it now, there is no telling how far we will end up from Chris. Nonetheless, the captain remains unmoved, and says, "I can't risk an environmental disaster." However, we will find another way to rescue Chris. Down there on the seabed, Chris calls Duncan and asks him where he is, but no one replies to him. He tries to look for the manifold, using underwater flare. One of the crew members informs Hannah that there is nothing wrong with the thrusters, as I have run them twice. Then, the captain approaches her and says if the thrusters are still working, we can take the computers offline and control the ship manually. Then, Hannah says that this system was designed to be used only in port, never in conditions like this one. If we make a slight mistake, we put the entire ship at risk. Nonetheless, Captain Andre convinces her and takes control of the ship manually to stop the ship from drifting further. Down in the sea, Chris manages to find the manifold and starts climbing to the top of it, but starts wearing out and shortly after, he passes out on top of the manifold. In the Belle, Duncan and Dave are down in the dumps after losing Chris during this mission. On the ship, Captain Andre and others strive to control the wobbling ship in the face of high currents, while constantly searching for Chris in the waters. Captain Andre sends a remotely operated vehicle to find Chris on the seabed and shortly after, they find him lying seemingly unconscious on top of the manifold. They take the ROV near Chris, and discover him moving his hands. Craig reveals that Chris shows no signs of breathing, involuntary spasms are from oxygen starvation to the brain. Additionally, he is left with only 7 minutes of oxygen. Craig asks Andrew to use the ROV to pick up Chris and fly him back to the Belle. Then, Andrew replies that the ROVs are only ever used for body recoveries, as the pincers are very dangerous to be used on anything alive. To this, Craig responds, filling tears in his eyes, I can't see any other options, as these boys are my responsibility. Therefore, he takes over the charge and begins to control the ROV himself. Craig takes the ROV near Chris, and tries to get a hold of him using the pincers of the machine, but fails to hold onto the D-ring on his harness, but he doesn't lose hope and makes another attempt, managing to catch the D-ring on his harness this time. He begins to get him out of the waters, but finds that Chris had hooked himself to the manifold in order to prevent himself from being washed away by the tide, when he is unconscious. In the Belle, Duncan tells the story of how he met Chris for the first time. He says, Chris and I met on a rescue dive. A lobster boat went down off the Scottish coast, and it took us a day to find the wreck, and while telling the story, Duncan breaks down. In one of the chambers of the ship, a crew member manages to rewire the system, bringing the DPS back online. Craig informs Duncan that they have found Chris in an unconscious state on top of the manifold, but they are heading back as fast as they can. Dave gets ready to bring back Chris, but before that, Duncan tells him that he doesn't want to lose another diver today. Afterward, Dave leaves the Belle and finds Chris right below the Belle, lying on the manifold. The Belle is lowered and Dave jumps off the Belle to get to Chris. Dave checks on him and afterward unhinges the hook, setting him free. After this, he starts climbing up to the Belle, taking Chris with him, but it becomes too heavy for him to carry Chris's body to the top. Just then, the Belle becomes unstable and almost hits them, but Dave not only saves himself but also Chris. Dave doesn't leave the umbilical and manages to hold onto it, and keeps rising up, no matter how spent he is. Eventually, Dave drags him to the top of the manifold and afterward, he helps him reach the Belle, where Duncan is already waiting for them. Duncan takes off his helmet and tries to bring him around. Nevertheless, Chris remains unresponsive, saddening everyone on the ship. Giving himself a shot, Dave approaches Chris and makes an attempt to bring him back to his senses. But again, Chris gives no response, causing Dave to shake his head. Shortly after, Chris says Dave's name and asks him if he is okay, which brings a smile to both of their faces. On the ship, the entire team gets chuffed after finding Chris back to his senses. Next, Chris winds up in the chamber when Dave arrives. Dave checks up on him and finds him okay. Chris asks him how long he had been unconscious. Then, Dave replies, nearly 40 minutes. Afterward, Dave gets up and starts leaving, but before that, Chris thanks him for saving his life. Afterward, Dave opens his bag and takes out a photo of his daughters, whom he loves very much. After the completion of 4 days of decompression, Chris meets Duncan one last time, and tells him he will talk to the management to keep him on rotation. Duncan appreciates him for this, and afterward, he says a final goodbye to Duncan and leaves. Chris returns home, where his wife Morag has been awaiting him. Morag embraces him like a baby, as if she had been asking him not to leave her ever again. Chris explains to her that there was an accident under the sea when a diver got stranded on the seabed and he had to be rescued. The diver nearly died, but was rescued before anything wrong could happen. Morag doesn't take even a single second to figure out that it was Chris who got stranded on the seabed. She pulls herself together and loves her husband after getting him back, and this marks the end of this movie.